So a little bit of a scheduling issue here, and I do apologize. Apparently our second keynote is in Grand Rapids. Yeah, so the story goes the second keynote talked to the third keynote yesterday and said I'm going right before you, right? The third keynote says yes. Before you, but not right before you. And it's all, yeah, we've emailed. So anyway, I'm going to move on. And I'm really sorry to say, you're going to have to hear from me again. So I do apologize. I'm sorry this has not happened before. And I totally understand if you're frustrated. I'm a little bit frustrated myself. So we're gonna get started. I'm going to talk a little bit more about types and venues, and then I want to talk a little bit about indicators. These are things we wouldn't have covered before. Does that make sense? So it's a bonus. The first sort of set of information we'll go over is going to be about types and venues. So where can we find sex trafficking? Where can we find labor trafficking? And we'll use some examples. Then we'll transition into a little bit more of the indicator piece. And I'm going to sort of move through these quickly. If you want information and you agree not to disseminate it and some of this stuff, I have no problem sending this to you. Okay? So if you want to get sort of a hard copy, that's fine. I'm completely fine with that. So we're going to go through some of these distinctions, which we've talked about a little bit before. We'll talk about types and venues of sex trafficking with examples, types and venues of labor trafficking with examples. And then we'll talk about some of the political and economic dynamics involved, which a couple of the questions have sort of alluded to already. This is a federal statute, which is different than the TVPA. So there are only a couple things I want you to consider with this. Recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision or obtaining of a person. The rest of it you've already seen. You've seen that in the TVPA definition. The reason why this part is important is because there are often networks for human trafficking. So those who recruit, those who harbor, those who transport, those who provide or obtain, all of those individuals can be charged with this crime, okay? So an individual or a group of people who come to a massage parlor and bring a mattress and groceries, chances are they're not there on a service trip, okay? So that's provision, okay? And so be aware of this, that it's not just sort of this dynamic between pimp and traffic victim or business owner and trafficking victim or so on and so forth, okay? Difficult distinctions we talked about a little bit already, okay? One of the things that survivors will often tell you, and Leslie, I know if she were here would tell you this, is that they never plan to grow up to be a victim of human trafficking, or as we would call a prostitute. They never think about, oh, I just want to grow up to be a prostitute one day. Okay? But through a set of circumstances, okay, a lot of these individuals, they're abused sexually as children. Okay? They don't have the same perception in terms of like their body, right? And what's healthy and what isn't. Okay? You've also got other sort of dynamics. You know, you actually, in Aaron's spoken word performance, a lot of those dynamics came out, didn't they? Okay? Absent parent. Okay? Substance abuse. So you find a lot of these different indicators sprinkled throughout his story, right? Or through his spoken word. Exotic dancing. Now there's not, again, I'm not the person that's going to stand up in front of you and say everyone who works in an adult establishment is a victim of human trafficking. They're not. Okay? Everyone who uses pornography is also involved in trafficking. No. Okay? Someone can have a struggle with pornography and not have anything to do with trafficking. Okay? So we've got to make these distinctions. Now, are there cases of individuals who've been trafficked in adult establishments? Through adult establishments? Definitely. Okay? Definitely. Are there individuals who use pornography who also are involved in trafficking? Yes. Do the traffickers almost always use pornography? Yes. That's how they train these young women. Okay? To provide, or young men even, to provide these different sexual services. Okay? There's a story I like to tell about being up at Michigan State. My advisor came up to me and said, hey, I need you to give a presentation. And I talked on a panel with a gentleman from Covenant Eyes, which is an online accountability organization, and then another gentleman who had written a book that supposedly was about human trafficking, but I read the book and it really didn't have anything to do with it. But there was like one person that showed up to this thing. And I was like, one person? What in the world? Is it one person? And my advisor comes up, and this is one of those things where like I like to protect my time sometimes because I got 4 kids and pretty active and all that kind of stuff. But I went up there to present to one person. I think that person was there with one of the people on the panel. Right? But it was still a great opportunity to be able to share about it, sort of talk about this issue of human trafficking. But the pornography piece was interesting because Covenant Eyes is an online accountability group that that allows people to help build these accountability networks around others who struggle with pornography, which I'm all about. Pornography changes our brains and rewires our brains in some really, really destructive ways. Okay? And it's important that we say that. It's not just something that we sort of like act like it's not a big deal. However, if someone's struggling with pornography, does not mean they're trafficking other people or they're buying sex or whatever necessarily. Okay? Sexual entertainment, sexual servitude. Asian massage parlors were our initial foray into this. And for a long time we heard in the community, oh, why would you stop legitimate businesses in Jackson in such difficult economic times, right? And it's like, really? And then, the other pushback was sort of like, these women, they want to be here and so on and so forth. Well, the interesting thing was we battled these assumptions for a long time. We still do. We spoke at a couple of us, somebody from used to be the Set Free group, myself, and someone, we spoke at one of the local wards in Jackson, where a lot of these venues are. And I'm not a big social media person always. I don't have a Facebook account. I have a hard enough time keeping up with my email. So like having a Facebook account would just be a disaster for me. Even though I'd like to stay in touch with people, and social media is hard because everybody has an opinion, right? And that's really difficult because it doesn't have to be educated or informed. Like they can just say whatever they want. And then people get in fights, and I'm like, I don't want to deal with that. So one time there was an MLive article posted on this talk in Jackson, and there were these comments. And I was like, I don't even want to look at these comments. People are just going to be saying weird stuff, and I don't want to deal with it. But actually there was a gentleman on there that said, you need to address this, you don't know how difficult, or you don't know how horrible the situation this is. And we're like, that's weird. That sort of sounds informed. Right? And so we went and we sort of like contacted him, or we sort of reached out to him. This is a gentleman that fell for one of the ladies in the Asian massage parlor. He followed her all around the Midwest. Former law enforcement. Okay? All around the Midwest. He said, you cannot share too much about me, because if you do, then something will happen to me. Because he knew the people, right? He knew it was involved. He said, I tried to buy her out. I tried to have her get out. She said, you don't understand, I cannot leave. Okay? I cannot leave here. Interfamilial pimping. We shared a couple of those stories. In Calhoun County, we've had a number of those cases go on in Jackson County as well. There's some very descriptive venues here. I'm not going to go through every single point, or else we're not going to be able to get to some of those indicators, and those indicators are really important. Okay? So residential brothels. Okay, you can read a little bit more about these on the Parlours Project website with some of those materials. But you can see some of the descriptions about those. They're primarily spread by word of mouth, so people tell one another. Very high frequency, 4 clients an hour, sometimes up to 25 to 48 men per day. So you think about, what does that do to someone, right? What does that do to someone? Not only physically, but mentally and psychologically as well. Fake businesses, massage parlors. Just in case you were curious, Jackson County, I think, has the highest density of Asian massage parlors and adult establishments in the state of Michigan now, per person, right? Woohoo! And so everybody, when I present around the state, okay, sorry, there's a little bit of sarcasm, I'm not really excited about that, but whenever we present around the state, everyone sort of says, hey, Jackson, yeah, you have those billboards, right? And so everybody sort of identifies it as a result of that, right? 6 to 10 men daily, 7 days a week. Standard date for women, 10 a.m. to 3 a.m. with a number of our students. Some of our students were in economics class one time, and they found it funny that the economics professor actually bought her husband a massage package for his birthday, not realizing what sort of massage they give, right? So that we thought that was really interesting. So even like some people, they don't know about this, right? Hostess strip clubs. Victims can be forced to provide sexual services, sexual abuse used to enforce control. There's a testimony of a gentleman actually from nearby Vandercook who was one of the regional managers of Deja Vu, which is a sort of a strip club chain in central Michigan, right? And he talks about some of the different dynamics that go on in these places, and it's interesting to look for some of those overlaps with human trafficking. Okay, again, not everyone that works at a Deja Vu or at wherever, Hooters, or what's the place in Parlours, right? They're not all victims of human trafficking, yeah? But there are some cases where there is bondage there and there's stuff going on, and it's sometimes it's tantamount to trafficking. Okay? We also have the bait and switch here that we talked about before, especially with exotic sort of foreigners being brought into strip clubs. Okay, so that's another example too. Internet-based. Internet is the #1 platform for buying and selling sex in the United States. Okay, I Am Jane Doe is a documentary that's out on Netflix now that traces the history of online internet sort of human trafficking backpage site. And the legal issue there is, can a third-party site be held responsible for the business transactions of two separate parties? Right? So if Backpage provides a venue for buyers and sellers within human trafficking, right, which they found that they made hundreds of thousands of dollars off human trafficking, can a website be held responsible, like Backpage, for these transactions to other groups? My thing is, well, they made all that money, yeah, they can, right? But the courts haven't ruled that way. Okay, federal courts especially. I Am Jane Doe. Another interesting documentary, Break the Chain, we've shown before around Jackson a couple of times. That's a local sort of Michigan State student. Go green, go white. I'm sorry, I had to. Such a wonderful, wonderful weekend last weekend. But anyway, soaking wet for both teams, CC. Okay, so as far as she's a former state student called Break the Chain. You can also get access to that and learn a little bit more too. Internet-based, this is the largest platform now. So there's story after story of individuals who have met someone and so on and so forth online, and it becomes a trafficking situation. With all my spare time, one of the areas that I'm really interested in is truck stops. Okay, so what goes on at truck stops? We know Asian massage parlors, sometimes they'll take women out to truck stops and turn them out and have them make money there. We know that in certain cases, truckers do certain things behaviorally, whether with their truck, their lights, or some of those things. There's CB radios to sort of correspond with traffickers and so on and so forth. So that's an area that we need to do a little bit more research on. Truckers Against Trafficking is the organization that does a lot of work on that at the national level. Okay. Street prostitution. This is where Leslie's story is absolutely fantastic in the sense that she talks about growing up and really sort of being befriended by someone that she really thought was someone that was going to come in and help her. A boyfriend was going to come in and help her, and then all of a sudden things change right away. Okay? And there's an excellent article, Catherine McKinnon from the University of Michigan Law School. She wrote through a journal at the University of Michigan. She's a very well-known legal scholar that talks about prostitution, inequality, and human trafficking, and it's an excellent read. Gives you a different look at that dynamic and sort of what choice looks like and all this sort of stuff. Pimps force adults and minors to sell commercial sex, often because of force, fraud, or coercion, physical abuse, threats, lies, manipulation, false promises. Okay, labor. Transition to labor here. This is going really quickly. If you want a copy of the PowerPoint or whatever, you can send me an email and I'll send it along to you. But again, we're sort of going on the fly here, so I appreciate your patience and hanging with me. Different forms of labor trafficking. Chattel slavery, debt bondage, contract slavery. Chattel slavery this is sort of looked at as sort of the old school form of slavery. Okay? So this is one where individuals are sort of captured, born, into permanent slavery. Their property, they can be bought and sold by the owner. It exists a lot in the developing world today, but it is now the least common form of slavery. Debt bondage, however, is the most common, okay, the most prevalent form. So when you look at person or family is forced into service for a loan. So an individual who feels like they don't have much opportunity where they're at, borrows money from someone else. That debt is used as leverage for that individual, to blackmail for that individual. So in terms of debt bondage, I think about, there's this movie a while ago, Memoirs of Vacation. You ever seen that? Where in the countryside, there are these young girls, they grow up in this family, but it's something like dad gets sick and there's this huge medical expense. So she then, they have to take out a loan and she's given sort of in response to that, right? And so you've got those sort of dynamics going on in some of these areas, right? Not only internationally, but also in the United States. So person or family, because of these social circumstances, they're forced into a loan. The length and nature of service is undefined, okay? So we've got to put ourselves in the shoes of the individual who's a victim here. Often not very well educated, doesn't necessarily know the new environment, may not speak the same language, and so on and so forth. So there's a number of these factors that marginalize them from wherever it is that they are, okay? And that makes it a lot more difficult for them. There are cases where individuals on debt bondage pay the debt off numerous times, but have no idea how that process works, okay? So they don't understand that they've paid the debt off a number of times. And I think about that, like, one of the things I think about is, like, buying, like, when Amber and I bought our first house, okay? If it wasn't for my wife, like, I'd have been lost. And I was in law school, okay? So, like, some of the numbers and the mortgage and all of this stuff works. I mean, it's tough to navigate at first. So for folks that don't have the education or haven't been through it or don't have the support networks there, how do they understand how to do these what we view as sort of like everyday sort of tasks or things like that, okay? And so when we look at some of these different indicators, length and nature of service undefined, so sometimes it's open-ended. There is no formal contract. They've just been paying to get bought out of it, to buy out of it, and they don't understand how much time has gone on, how much they pay. They only understand this person tells me I need to do this, okay? Debt is not reduced, and often it becomes this complete physical control over the laborer, okay? Contract slavery, also very common, okay? Contract slavery, now contract isn't always a written contract. There could be something called like an oral contract, where two parties, one party lays out the terms, the other one agrees, and then there's some sort of discrepancy that sort of doesn't come along with the contract. And I'll explain that a little bit more, okay? This is complicated, because in some cases there isn't a written contract. So how do you uphold a contract, or certain terms of a contract, if you don't have a hard copy, okay? That becomes very difficult for a lot of prospective victims, because they don't, upon arriving at a place of employment, terms of employment are drastically altered. Okay? Employee has little recourse due to lack of education, knowledge, and support system, and so on and so forth. Okay? There's this threat of being blacklisted. So what happens if an individual, like a farm worker, steps up and says, I haven't been paid, then the employer will not only could not only fire them, but also let the other employers know what happened, and they then won't hire that person. Okay? Blacklisting, trying to get you away from that NBC show. Different kind of blacklist, altogether, right? This is sort of like it's like blackmailing in terms of employment, okay? Often reluctantly consents to terms of employment despite the breach in contract. So in terms of labor trafficking, the majority of workers, they don't say anything because they want to honor their employer. And they want to make money because it's not about them, it's about the people back home. And it's about other people they're trying to help support. It's not about what happens to them, it's about these other people. So they don't say anything. Right? For a number of reasons, okay? Often little or no recourse legally, lack of adequate representation for rights of the worker. So someone asked in the previous presentation, what sorts of resources are out there? If someone is undocumented, sometimes it's hard to establish in certain courts what's called standing. that they actually have the ability to stand in front of that court. Okay? And so sometimes workers are scared because they feel like if they share something, then they don't have, they may not, because they're undocumented, they may not be able to be represented in front of the court. And that depends on the type of attorney and how well the attorney knows the law and so on and so forth, okay? Workers need jobs. The income is enough. It's better than what they knew in their home country, or in their sending country, okay? They often permit exploitation in hopes of a better tomorrow, okay? We'll talk a little bit more about that later, okay? Here's some different venues. Sweatshop factories are referred to as maquiladoras. Restaurant labor, okay? Agricultural work. Begging or trinket selling is on the rise. That's something that in the research there's a lot more out there about. So in your case, you mentioned before, it's very similar. You've got someone who's running that ring, but you've got kids or young people out panhandling. They're almost always working for someone else, okay? And in fact, this has sort of raised some questions for me because in central Michigan, I'm talking like 127 corridor, like Lansing and Jackson, I've seen more people out begging and panhandling in the last couple of years than I've seen in a long time. And so one of my questions is, again, with all of our spare time, is like, what would happen if I said, hey, you want to go grab dinner? Go grab lunch, go over to Tim Hortons and sit down and talk to someone. Because what I learned, the dissertation research was great in terms of human trafficking, but what I really learned was about people's stories, right? What brought you to the United States? What did that process look like? Okay? And I gained such an appreciation for people given all they had been through on that whole journey, right? And so when we talk about this idea of begging or trinket selling, what do some of those networks look like? What are those people working for someone? You know, where are they from? How did they get here? All those sorts of questions are interesting to learn a little bit more about. Is this a potential case of trafficking? Is that person there because they want to be, or is that person there because they're forced to be? Okay? Landscaping, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped a couple. Food industry, processing factories on the west side, not just those who pick the crops, but those who process the crop in the processing factories. There are a lot of those places too. One of the gentlemen I talked to in my dissertation research worked like 75 hours a week. He was in his mid-50s, worked 75 hours a week, had done so for the last 10 or 15 years. When I talked to him about overtime, he had no idea what overtime was. They just paid him the same rate no matter what. He had to get up no matter when they would call him. He lived right across the street from the factory. No matter when they would call him, he had to get up. Okay, and this is a company that you would know. I mean, I don't know. You're going to the DC now, some of these students, but a lot of us that are out, we're shopping. This is a local Michigan-grown company, right? And so we have to ask those questions to make sure we know where sort of our money's going and what we're supporting, okay? Hotel work. So in northern Michigan, there are a lot more streams of labor now than there used to be before. So in the hotel industry, you'll find more women from the Caribbean, Jamaicans and others. On the island, Mackinac Island, okay? You'll find girls in the summer from Eastern Europe. Again, I'm not here to say, oh my gosh, we should all go run and save them. Like, no, okay? But we should learn more about how they get there and what that process looks like. Because we don't want people coming and working to be taken advantage of, right? We want to be able to make sure they can have rights and ensure some of those rights and so on and so forth. So if anybody knows of a big grant where I can go just spend a couple summers in northern Michigan, my kids wouldn't stand up for that. They'd be like, are we going to play baseball? Play baseball out there? Not until like July. Anyway, okay. Nail salon workers. A number of cases where individuals have come and said, I go to this nail salon, this young girl always does my nails, and she seems just really nervous. She seems apprehensive. She keeps looking behind her to make sure everything is okay. Does that make sense? So not that means that young, it could be a family business, and she's working there, and it's not during normal hours, or excuse me, it's during non-school hours. Okay, but there are other cases where there's something more going on, for example. Okay, and we got to learn how to look for some of those things and so on and so forth. Landscaping, gardening, casinos, magazine peddlers, hair braiders. Hair braiders, there was a hair braiding case in Flint. A week ago yesterday, we did a training in Flint. And as a young girl, working 14, 15 hours a day in a hair braiding salon or a hair braiding venue, who wasn't in school, so on and so forth. She's not getting any of that sort of thing. So there are those cases that happen in some of these venues as well. Okay? Yep?
I just want to go back to the nail salon workers because it's not only, let's say, us Americans, United States,
Right?
Caucasian citizens,
Yep.
Vietnamese who come here
Yep.
and start a business, also traffic in women people. And I'm not making it point of that.
Right.
What I'm saying is, we're not just the perpetrators.
Right. Right.
There are other perpetrators you wouldn't think are perpetrators.
Good point. So let me piggyback on that real quick here, because this is sort of tying a couple of points together. Yeah, I mean, that's true. This isn't about like, let's make white Americans feel horrible. Okay? We're not trying to do this. People traffic regardless of skin color, race, ethnicity, so on and so forth. So we've got to understand that, and that's a very good point. A lot of the nail salons that you hear these reports coming from, they tend to be Vietnamese owned. Does that mean that there's human trafficking going on? For sure, no. You will find a great number of Thai massage parlors in Thailand. Okay, you'll find massage parlors in Cambodia. 70 to 80% of Cambodian young men lose their virginity in a massage parlor or at some sort of brothel. So this isn't just an American thing. True. And the traffickers aren't always the ones that you think. When you often think about traffickers, think about males. Young women are recruiting too, through a lot of the agencies that some of you may work for. So you think about juvenile detention centers, foster care, those sorts of venues. Okay? They're recruiting, and often they're not the people you think that are going to be recruiting. Okay? So it's not, there are people that look like me that recruit. But they're trying to get around that by sending in young women to do the recruiting. Okay? And a lot of times sometimes those young women are the women they refer to as the bottom bitch. Like, she's the one who's the most loyal. So he'll send her in to go in and recruit because she's the most loyal, and she won't, she's the one that has his back the most in trying to help these girls adjust, right? Very good point. I appreciate you pointing that out, okay? So I'm going to make a jump here real quick I'm going to specifically address the indicators. We've got a little time here, and then we need to transition to the workshops. And again, I apologize, this is a little rushed. Just trying to fill in for the second keynote here. Okay, I'm going to go through these factors I can send to you. I want you to know these indicators. Okay, these indicators are very important. Okay? Individuals who are not in control of their own time, money, or other resources. We talked about documents, right? We talked about documents. Evidence of a controlling relationship, or personal documents. Evidence of a controlling relationship. This is the overlap with DV in some cases. Domestic violence. Okay, so they call me up from the public health center. Professor Norwood, we think we might have a case of human trafficking. We have this woman who's come in she's been in residence in a number of different states, no permanent address, has had children through 5 or 6 different males, always has someone come in with her and speak for her. Huge red flag. She's not speaking for herself. Someone's speaking for her. Okay? Even when she goes in, she comes in for this prenatal care, even when she goes in to have tests done, this person is always there. And I'm just like, yeah, that's something you should be concerned about. Can I give you some more information on what you can do moving forward? Okay? And the hard thing is that there's this dynamic whereby you can't give out some of these things more specifically because you've got to respect what the law says about her medical information. Okay? Those of you that are helping professionals, you understand that you have this. So like, she's got to be willing to ask for help to some extent, right? Now minors are different. Minors you can call in and you can make a report. You can tell that CPS worker, I think there may be human trafficking going on. And then you would follow that up. Okay? You can also call the hotline with minors. Okay? But in terms of that dynamic, it's different. You've got to have somebody that's willing to disclose that to some extent. Okay? Loss of interest in age-appropriate activities. Okay? So there's certain things that you can tell about someone, that there's a maturity to them, where they're more concerned about what's going on, and like they're more concerned about adult activities that are going on than they are age-appropriate activities. Okay? Part of that is because they've had to live a life where they're doing things and engaging in behavior that adults normally do. Okay? So that's sort of that peak in terms of maturity and so on and so forth is very, very important. Okay? To look for some of those differences in maturity and so on and so forth. The use of language, the wife, daddy, I mean, it's its own subculture. So as you're interacting with individuals that are from different sort of population groups, are dealing with different things, it's its own subculture. Okay, survivors will talk about you need to learn how to speak the language. If you don't know how to speak the language, you don't have any business being there. Okay? If you're not willing to hear about some of these things, it's very, very difficult to be able to interact and identify with someone and validate who they are and where they're coming from. Okay? So you've got to understand what the language is like. Visible signs of physical abuse. Now this cuts both ways. Okay, so with DV, sometimes you see those physical sort of manifestations on someone. But with human trafficking, the phrase I always come back to is he's not going to beat her so much that she can't go out and work. See, if someone's not beaten up, doesn't mean they're not trafficked. Okay? Now, if you see sort of signs and so on and so forth, then that's an indicator. But just because she isn't beaten up doesn't mean that she's not, right? Or he's not. Okay? Chronic exhaustion. This is something I've got to be attuned to because sometimes I have students that fall asleep in the back of my class. And the last thing I think about is, are you okay? I think about, wake up. I've got something important. I can't even say that. I can't even say that with a straight face. Okay, so our first response should be, are you all right? Okay, story of Teresa Flores in privileged Birmingham, Michigan. Okay, falling asleep in class all the time. Okay, nobody asked her, right? Are you okay? It was like, oh, she's one of those kids. Something's going wrong, whatever. Teachers. If you are in here are teachers, or studying to be teachers. Teachers are one of the individuals that build the strongest rapport with students. Okay? You build that rapport and they feel like they can trust you. You might be that person as opposed to the other people that are just making fun of them. You might be that person that they reach out to. And there have been cases in Michigan, prominent cases in Michigan, where a student, I don't want to go home for the summer. Well, what student doesn't want to go home for the summer? Well, I don't want to go home for the summer because whatever. And so you can be that point person. Okay? History of STIs or STDs, that's fairly self-explanatory, not always definitive, but it's very telling. Okay? It can be very telling as well. So not always if it's one of those red flags, but it doesn't in and of itself prove something. Okay? Chronic runaways. We'll also put in that category throwaways. Individuals that continue to run away from home. Now part of that could be the individual, him or herself. But part of the question is, what are they running from? Okay? Why are they being kicked out? When we talk about throwaways, we overlap with LGBT, sort of marginalized sexual communities, who in many cases, they have their families that very well intend meeting families, but throw them out because they're not living the way they think they should. And then that person, what do they do within the next 24, 48, 72 hours? They're approached by someone who will validate them, who will tell them it's okay, and they're all right. Okay? And so we've got to think about those sort of dynamics too. Extreme neglect in the home. The example with CPS started off with extreme neglect in the home, and then it grew. Does neglect mean human trafficking? Not always. Not always. Can it be a sign or an indicator? Yes. Okay, it's another thing for us to look for. Okay? Contradicting personal information. Now I've got to be careful with this one. From a law enforcement standpoint, contradicting personal information denotes a lack of credibility. This person can't give me a straight story. From a social service perspective, the lack of, or the contradicting personal information means something completely different. Okay? Is Joyce in here? Joyce, great to see you. Joyce, I gotta steal one of your lines for a minute here. Joyce Haskett back here, one of the things that she said that sort of knocked me off my feet, I mean not literally, but like mentally. she says to me, she says to us when she's presenting, she goes, sometimes the victims don't have the words to explain the trauma and the abuse they've been through. So someone not telling you something, those of you who are social service folks in here, you get that. Helping professionals, you get that. It's not that she's not telling you because she's hiding it. She doesn't have the words, or she may not know if she can trust you or he can trust you. Okay? So when we look at those dynamics with contradicting personal information, one of the best models of how to address human trafficking comes out of Central Florida. Okay? And I reviewed this manuscript for this task force, this federal task force. The first point of contact is social service professionals. Because they understand abuse, they understand trauma, they understand these gaps in the story, and they can build that sort of trust over time. I've given some examples where juvenile justice folks have done that too, done a great job, and we've had some cases emerge from those agencies. Okay? But it's a partnership. Prosecution rates on human trafficking cases go up when the first point of contact is social service professional. That's not to say that police and law enforcement don't have their place in terms of addressing this. They do. It's just a partnership. Okay? We need to work together, not against each other all the time. Okay? Extreme secrecy and whereabouts unaccounted for time. So there's these gaps in time where an individual or he or she is not explaining what's going on. Okay? And I'm going to wrap up this last slide, and then we'll give you some directions for the workshops and all that kind of stuff. Okay? Because time-wise, we're getting close. Sudden change in lifestyle. So a trafficker or a pimp may go out and lavish upon a prospective victim all kinds of special things, jewelry, meals, so on and so forth, to sort of like it's like grooming, sort of a grooming process and a preparing process and it's also sort of a process of bondage. Hey, look at all this money I spent. You owe me now, right? Wearing clothes that are not weather appropriate. Now, I don't mean, college student, I don't mean to offend you. I'm not looking at you when you're all manly walking across campus when it's 10 below and your t-shirt and your shorts. That's not a sign. That's just a sign of you need attention or something. I don't know. You don't have enough laundry. I don't know what it is. But there have been cases of victims of human trafficking who wear inappropriate clothes. So dressing like it's wintertime in the summer to exercise agency over his or her body. Okay? This is sort of like, I'm sort of controlling this body. And if I'm sort of dressed like this, then you're not looking at me any other way, like inappropriately, right? At least in theory. Constantly getting nails and hair done. This is the example from before. Sudden presence the nails and hair done is sort of the sudden change in lifestyle idea. And then some presence of older friend or boyfriend. There's an example in Jackson where Matt Osborne actually and I gave a talk at the public health clinic. It's a number of years ago. And a lady comes up crying. And I'm like, oh no, what did I do? Said something I shouldn't have, was insensitive in some way or whatever. She comes out, she's crying. She goes, you don't understand how serious this is. My daughter met someone, this was in the days of instant messenger. I know, ages ago. And I'm sorry, I'm the most I'm not technology savvy at all. I mean, I just don't, these are things I've heard of. Instant messenger. The internet, I mean, what is that? Yeah, that's funny. Whatever. So like she comes out, she says, my daughter met someone on instant messenger. And she got to know him over time. Some of these signs had emerged. And this is the balance between where is that sort of that overarching parental control and how much do I let my kid be a kid sort of thing, and it's sort of a dynamic that if you've got the answer, I'm all ears here. But like in terms of how that dynamic works, she said if I had not gone online and saw her account, I wouldn't have known that he was going to meet her the next day at Jackson Crossings Mall, right? And they were going to go off to another state together, right? And I know that's sort of the premise of Walt and Wanda will share a little bit in their workshop. That's sort of the idea of chosen, and what it gets behind is these things can happen online, okay? This idea that we've got to be more aware. And as parents, how do we engage and have some of these conversations with our kids, yet not push them so far that they're not going to feel comfortable talking to us about it, right? And so, okay. Fearful, anxious, overly submissive behavior. A lot of you are trained to look for these things. Added interest in older men. I'm going to finish up with this tattoo and branding. A lot of times, there's branding goes on in the sense that the tracker, the pimp, he brands her, whether, like in the old school, like you talk to this group of women that he has is referred to as a stable. Okay? The branding can be sort of the hot iron, sort of old school branding, but it can also be tattoos. Our campus safety director, our previous campus safety director, sent out this email to me about how they're finding this in young women where you've got barcode tattoos under the lip. Okay, you've got gang tattoos that show ownership and property, okay, over her. And so you've got some of these different tattoos, also sort of in the ear or behind the neck. There are a number of these different places where these tattoos can be. And so when we look at some of this, that's also a sign or an indicator, hey, I noticed, I like that tattoo, where does that come from? And you can get a better sense that way. Okay? So anyway, I've got to wrap up here. If you have questions, I'm going to hang out here for a few minutes. You can feel free to ask me. But